Hello, and welcome to episode number 17 of Fast Casual, Landon's official podcast, brought to you live today, Wednesday, November 29th, from two places today, Atlanta, Georgia, and New York City. It is Atlanta, Georgia.
It is Atlanta. You're correct.
Okay, very good. I was like, get the first thing wrong. My name is Alex Mann, and I'm your host again, and it's great to be back after a 2 week break. As I like to say, every single restaurant has a story to tell. And so without further delay, let's get the show on the road. I'm delighted to say I am chatting with Mandy Psiaki, Director of Field Operations at Chick-fil-A today. Mandy, say hi.
Hello there.
All right, great stuff. And do you want to give us a bit of a background, introduction into your background, Mandy? I know that you've got an insanely well-rounded background, over 11 years in Chick-fil-A and Air Force. Do you want to give us a bit of insight into who you are and how you got to where you are today?
I'd be happy to, Alex, but I do have to correct you. It's not Air Force, it's Army. So I go back to, I went to West Point. That was sort of the start of, I guess, my professional career. And did that for 4 years. As a result of going to West Point, then you owe a 5-year commitment to the military. And so I served those 5 years. Part of that time I was in Iraq. So from 2007 to 2009 for about 15 months. Met my husband while I was at West Point. So we spent those 5 years in the military. Most of that time was apart. And if you total the time we were together, it was about a year collectively, not all at once. And so then once we decided to make the transition out of the military, we were both trying to figure out what was next for us. And he pursued grad school and ended up going to HBS in Boston.
Nice.
And because of that, I decided to take a job with P&G, which I thought was going to be in Boston. Found out it was actually going to be in Cincinnati at the last minute, and moved to Cincinnati. He stayed in Boston. I started my civilian career, as we like to call it, in the military, at P&G, and not in Boston, in Cincinnati. And then was there just a few months, had actually pursued Chick-fil-A before that and really wanted to be with Dave. So decided to make the move with him, and then decided while I was in Cincinnati that I'd really like to go to Chick-fil-A if I knew I was going to be away from him. So I ended up reaching back out, which was really rare at that point to say. I'd gone through a process with them and then come back, and they were super gracious and kind. And so I ended up starting with Chick-fil-A in January of 2012 and have been there ever since, and have done couple different roles. I started in franchisee selection, so selecting operators for our restaurants in the Northeast and the Midwest. Then I moved to training, where I led a team that was called specialty training, focused on training for operators and team members. And then I led our training development program for new talent into the organization, and then moved over most recently and led our leadership development program for Chick-fil-A. So I am in the middle of another transition, but it hasn't happened quite yet.
How did you know that Chick-fil-A was for you? Like, of all the brands, because I appreciate that, say, you probably saw Procter & Gamble, P&G as this is going to be a great grad role, a lot of, professional training, and a kind of, I can figure out where I want to go from there. But you knew, like, in the back of your mind that Chick-fil-A was a business that you wanted to, like, really get involved with? Like, I'm curious, like,
it's so wild. Actually, I was at Fort McPherson, was my last duty assignment in the Army, which was in Atlanta. And while I was there were a few folks that I worked with who knew I was looking for what was next after the military. And someone said to me, I think you would love Chick-fil-A. And I said, no, I'm not going to go work for a fast food restaurant. I don't think that's in the cards for me. And they said, you should really look into it. I think you would really enjoy it. And so it was their encouragement that sent me on a journey to go and learn more about the company and the business and just who they were. And as I started to learn more, at that point, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. Leaving the military is a really hard transition, and trying to figure out what is it that I've done that applies. There's so many things, but I don't know how to translate that very well. I know things I enjoy. And so I started reading about the company and their purpose and mission. And then I found a job in franchisee selection that was interviewing operators. And I had never interviewed a soul in my life, Alex. So I go and apply for a job that I have basically no experience to say I've done this thing and therefore I could do what you're asking me to do, but I felt like I could learn quickly. I was super passionate about understanding people's stories and how those fit into their dreams and potential, and was a psychology major in college. So I felt like there was at least that sort of relates.
Yeah.
Um, and so thankfully they saw something in me that said this can be a fit, but it really wasn't because I had done that job before, which is what makes me passionate today about helping people figure out what it is that they want to do, and then being really flexible with them on that journey as they realize what they're great at and passionate about, and finding the match that's
Yeah,
best.
it's interesting. That's awesome. And it's interesting, like I guess like kind of coming into your role with sort of like a military background, and
Mhm.
the military being the largest employer in the United States. I think it is, or I believe the military is
It
like,
might be, I don't know if military, maybe, but maybe if you think of like all government
yeah,
employees,
I
probably.
think so. I think it's something like that, one of the largest. And so you think about like, you're obviously part of an extraordinarily massive sort of community. And then you come into your sort of quote unquote civilian role, as you mentioned. you
Hmm.
know, what do you like feel like, over say the last 11 years, even in Chick-fil-A, as part of your learning from sort of West Point, being on tours of duty, that you've
Hmm.
kind of taken with you and kind of guided you into sort of your leadership position today?
I think it's a couple things. Resiliency is one of them. So you learn that there's not much that's going to come your way, probably nothing that you can't figure out or overcome. And so I think having been, which is, I'm going to use a very military term, but it's like battle tested.
Yeah.
You've been through really difficult things, and you therefore know when you face something that seems hard or is hard, you can get through it because you've done it before, and you can look back and say, here's all the times where that's been true. So I think being resilient, just the ability to problem solve well. There's so many things going back even to West Point. The whole curriculum is based on what's called the Thayer method. And it's all about teaching yourself before you go to class, which I absolutely hated when I started at West Point because it was the most ridiculous concept to me. Right, so I'm supposed to teach myself for tomorrow's class what I don't know, and show up and be ready to ask questions and solve problems based on what I taught myself. And I thought that's horrible. And it was so
Yeah.
hard my first year, because it's so different than the way that we had been taught prior to that. And so, but I think the value in that is learning to solve problems and work through things that you don't know how to do initially, and you will
Yeah.
just find a way to figure it out. And then the aspect of team, I think that's really strong in the military, and you have this great sense of purpose that you're actually given a team when you walk into the military on day one, and that's true for the rest of your time. And then
Yeah.
that translates to working with others and knowing how to be collaborative and influence in a way that's going to hopefully get people to jump on board. And so I think all those things are really important from military to civilian. So just being resilient, ability to problem solve, and then being a great team player.
Do you think with something like say the Thayer method, for example, which now I
Mhm.
feel like I'm going to read up on after this call?
Oh yeah, you got to check it out, Alex. Oddly enough, our youngest daughter, is named Thayer,
Oh wow.
and
It had an impact.
well, my husband and I met at West Point, and we met in Thayer Hall. And
Wow.
if you are someone connected to West Point, yes, the idea of Thayer is like, I don't know what emotion is stirred up in you when you hear that, but for us, it was really significant in a
Yeah.
positive way, being that we met there. But yes, it can create some feelings of anxiousness probably for folks.
Do you feel that has prepared you? Because it's fascinating. I think about that a lot. Like, I mean, you hear like say Jeff Bezos and sort of at Amazon, for example, talk about like the pre-read notes before they sit down in a meeting, where
Mhm.
they have that printed out, fully formed sentence document, not like bullet points, where people have to consume it before the meeting begins. Now, I don't know how true that actually is to every meeting they have, but quote unquote fable sort of process they have there, cultural
Right.
process. And I'm curious because it sounds like that's, doing the pre-read before the meeting, which doesn't really happen in lots of organizations. You hope that happens in lots of organizations.
Yeah.
Do you apply that to say your work, say in your own life at Chick-fil-A now, for example?
I am probably not great at
Yeah.
yeah, so that I've got some work to do in some of those areas, but I am very structured is what I
Yeah.
will say, Alex. And if I am responsible for a team or a meeting, I want to make sure that I've been really clear about how we're going to use the time and what we're hoping to achieve, and that we're maximizing the time that we're together. I
Sure.
don't want to just put a block of time on the calendar. We show up, we have a conversation about something, and we're going to fill the time that we have. I
Yeah.
want to be really purposeful about what that time is. And so I definitely try to do those things. I will not say that I'm perfect at them. But I think anyone who knows me would say Mandy is someone who likes structure, process, systems, and will work really hard to put those in place.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And I think, like, it's amazing how places like West Point, and Navy Academy and all these sort of institutions instill those kind of key processes into people. And I'm curious, like, as a veteran yourself, like how you think about, I suppose it's almost like a segue to another kind of topic, but effectively,
Yeah.
like, when you think about being a veteran yourself, like bringing like sort of veterans sort of like into the workforce, into civilian life, and how, you as a leader, at say Chick-fil-A in a sort of talent position, I'm very curious your take on like bringing veterans, say like into Chick-fil-A. Like, is there a formal process, or how do you think about encouraging and programs for bringing veterans back into sort of into the civilian workforce?
Yeah, I think there's two things I think about. I think as a veteran transitioning, it is really good to keep a humble spirit and not have the mentality that I am the greatest and therefore should be able to do anything that a business asks me to do. And if I see a job that's for a high level leader, that I can just take where I was in the military and directly translate that over to another job within an organization. Because oftentimes, I would say all the time, you're going to have to prove yourself wherever you go next. And they're going to want to believe that you can do what you have done previously somewhere else, and that you can show that over time. So I think for those leaving the military, it's really helpful and necessary to be humble about what the experiences are, how that translates. And there's this common saying in the military that we do more before 9 a.m. than the rest of the world. And it's like, well, maybe, but also a lot of people are doing a lot of things. So I think don't be too proud of what you've done, that you can't be humble and say, hey, I know that I still have a lot to learn. This is a totally new industry for me. So I think that's important as the veteran. As
Yeah.
the company looking at a veteran, I think it's really important to look past what you may read or see on a resume as a bullet that might not perfectly translate, which I'm
Yeah.
so grateful that Chick-fil-A did to me or for me. Because if they said, well, you went to West Point, you were a finance officer, you're applying for a role in franchisee selection, like I said, never interviewed a soul in your life, therefore you
No.
can't interview. It's like, that's not true either. Who am I as an individual? What skills do I bring? And how do those skills then translate to this job versus
Yeah.
looking for someone who might have done something, but they may not be great at it. And it may take me just a little bit longer to get up to speed. But once I get up to speed, I'm going to be able to add, hopefully, as much or more value than someone who's been doing that for a long time. And so I do think it's much more for the employer about looking at what are the skills, the
Yeah.
things that are intangible, that it's going to be really hard for me to train someone or teach someone how to have resilience, how to problem solve well, how to be creative and curious and a great team player. Those are hard to teach. I can teach you how to interview
Yeah.
someone. And so I think there's got to be a lot more flexibility on the part of the employer to be open-minded about what are the things that are part of who they are as a person that are really going to add tremendous value. And I can teach you the thing that you need to do, because it's not rocket science in most cases. Now, there are
Yeah.
certainly jobs that require very technical skills, probably not the best to consider for something like this. But outside of that, I think that's important. And then I think the humility on the part of the veteran is really important too.
I would almost like double click like humility in the sense that I think it's just vital in every walk of life, frankly.
Everything.
I mean, as you know, somebody who lacks humility is just,
No fun to be
working
around.
with people who lack it, you can tolerate it for only so long.
Yeah, you don't want to be around those people. You don't want to work with them.
Yeah.
And it, someone who thinks they know everything is
I struggle with that.
not.
Like, all my colleagues who could listen to this are like, Alex is not being truthful.
Okay,
Um,
you should play this on repeat for them, Alex. Like you are doing it. You
well, there
agree.
must be some type of lack of humility to host a podcast in the first place. Um, but I guess, for the second part, we were talking about like looking like between the lines in the resume when it comes from somebody like a veteran. It's actually very interesting because obviously, I mean, like there could be many, many sort of types of veterans within sort of like our program that we have here. Like we've north of 1 million people that have come through the landed app now, which
Mhm.
is kind of unbelievable. We're, just even thinking about that number is just crazy. But like, I think a lot about like, access to opportunity
Yes.
and designing frameworks to enable that sort of opportunity. I remember I worked at a company called Lambda School before this, and there was an amazing, amazing head of recruitment there named Jane Martin. Actually, I'm gonna have to message her after this to tell her that she's getting a shout out. But
That's
she was
good.
head of recruitment at Instagram, and then she came over, and obviously there's huge D&I programs in Facebook or Meta now, whatever. And I remember, you know, like designing the process to enable it as opposed to forcing it down your throat, in the sense that like, how do
That's
you
right.
design the interview process to be such that you give people an opportunity to be interviewed in the first place, as opposed to saying we have to hire and hit a quota of a certain number of a type of underrepresented minority. And I'm also curious about how people think about designing a framework for opportunity, because in one sense, like, I mean, a veteran is a type of underrepresented minority because they're coming from a very specific background into like a civilian life. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? And so I'm
Alex,
curious how
I
you think about it.
love the idea of access and
Yeah,
how do you create a system that is allowing for and encouraging access for folks, because I think that's really what it's about. I don't
yeah,
love a system with a quota. I don't think that's healthy or encourages the right behavior. But if you say our goal is to make this opportunity as accessible as it can possibly be to as many people, I think you have to first look at what is the job description and who are the people that are getting filtered in and out.
yeah,
And if you write a role specifically for an experience that is a minimum requirement or a degree that is a minimum requirement, you are already cutting out a huge population of people that actually could be incredible with some
yeah,
training and coaching. And you, as the employer, have to be willing to make the investment in them to get them to where they need to go. But it's seeing their potential. And I love nothing more than meeting someone and seeing potential in them.
yeah,
And so I think that is really important. And something that we did with the leadership development program at Chick-fil-A was we actually had a degree requirement as part of the role when I started.
yeah,
And we got into a room after an interview day, and there were a group of leaders around the table. And one of the candidates we met, we all agreed should be part of the program. And at the end of the conversation, I said to the group, "Do you all realize that they don't have their degree?" And everyone said, "No, we had no idea." And so at that point, it was, well, now that we know this, how do we feel? Is this still the right decision to say, no, they don't meet the qualifications, but yet we just said they were a great candidate and would be a fit? So what are we going to do with that? Well, at that point, we can't make a decision in that room about changing a major qualification that's been in
yeah,
place for a long time. But we can definitely have bigger discussions, which is exactly what we did, and moved really quickly within our organization to say, is this something that needs to be true or should we
yeah,
adjust? And we decided to adjust it. And that person ended up coming into the program, is actually now a Chick-fil-A operator. And
yeah,
so just one small example of how you can adjust a job description and requirements to create more access for folks that could be incredible long term within the business.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I was I mean, it must be about a year ago now. I kind of just did a lot of homework on job descriptions for the type of employees that we have in terms of like how do you write a headline, what kind of words. And it's amazing how even the words you use, if you like, you can A/B test your job, like even on the job descriptions, and like certain words, like looking for a rock star. Like for example,
Hmm.
that phrase about
Hmm.
a rock star, or whatever, is actually works worse. I heard this is like a LinkedIn piece of data that I found on their blog. It's like that actually attracts less women to a job posting than it does like men, for example, by using a
Because
word like
women just don't think of themselves that way. Is that why?
yeah,
Or
I guess like, using the word rock star obviously is quite a masculine sort of like
yeah,
I
yeah,
guess you think of like Motley Crue or something. Do you know what I mean? Whereas like in this sense, it's like, but they see it in the data just in terms of like even the language you use in the job post can, and I don't want to use the word discriminatory, but like in one sense, like it can be exclusionary in the sense that
right,
like how do
right.
you design even a job post even like try to hit like both bases because you're trying to like attract as many people as possible to that job role. And it's amazing what bits of data you can see that like certain words can have an impact on how people even click to apply.
It's so interesting because I think I've heard that there's a lot of women who, when they think about a promotion or even moving into another job, will often wonder, like, am I ready for that?
Yeah.
I don't feel like I'm 100% ready. Whereas oftentimes men are like, yeah, I'll figure it out when I get there. And so I think it is a just difference in mentality and how we
Yeah.
think about things. And honestly, like the working together is really good. And I think men can help encourage women in that, especially in the workplace. If you see someone who is a rock star, don't maybe call them that or whatever, but that you are encouraging them, like, hey, here's all the things I see in you, and you're ready for this. Like, you're going to go and kill it when you get there, and here's why. So you should step into that.
Yeah, totally. And I mean, it's interesting, when we talk about like job descriptions and having them for sort of senior kind of leadership roles where you see talent, but you have sort of a process in place that sort of like, that's where like strangles the talent, but you know what I mean? In the
Pretty
sense of like,
rigid.
or like I see it puts a ceiling on sort of promotion, I should say,
Yes.
rather. And it's interesting because, like just before we were getting on, you were talking about the CEO of IBM who was talking about
Mhm.
this exact topic, and you were saying that you were at a talk about that. I mean, like, what like it's interesting because in somewhere company like say like an IBM for example, where I would imagine the vast majority are degree holders within that organization and probably like advanced degrees to work in
Right.
AI kind of software business, and your business is in hospitality and like franchise talent, which like I guess is not like you don't need a master's in sort of computer science to be in that sort of role. I'm curious like what you were taking away from her and
Yeah,
just
well, it's so
regaling that
fascinating
story here,
because even though we're in hospitality and food service, and in your mind, it seems natural that maybe that wouldn't be a requirement.
Yeah,
I think as a society, we have made that something that is seen as important. And the going to college, I think there's other ways if you look at what is going to college and getting an advanced degree, it's setting a goal for yourself, pursuing that, and following through and finishing, completing it. And I think you can do that in so many other ways that may not be traditional, and that being the
yeah,
most traditional path. And so it's then allowing people an opportunity to showcase how they've done that in their life that may not be traditional, because even though it seems like maybe an organization like Chick-fil-A or other hospitality type
yeah,
industries roles wouldn't be as rigid about a degree requirement, I think that's just what society has made normal.
yeah.
And it takes a lot to break out of that mold and even be comfortable thinking about it differently. But it's really, what is that degree showing us? And I think, how do we find other ways to get to that same principle, skill,
Totally.
without it being a degree? But there still needs to be evidence that someone has set goals, they follow through on those goals, they've completed them, they're driven, and you can see that in other ways.
And so I guess like it's interesting, and your capacity as like a leadership do I call you like a leadership leader? Is that a way to like phrase you? Like
I don't know. We can go with that. Sounds good, Alex.
it's a new LinkedIn title, leadership leader. Uh, and it's interesting because like obviously, like if I'm understanding now, like kind of what you're kind of doing, it's like you like try to highlight talent that you think are ready for leadership positions within the corporate Chick-fil-A sort of environment. Is that what I'm trying to understand? Like,
So I'll explain the program at a high level. So
yeah,
we
too,
have,
because I
yeah,
think that segues
it's
nicely
called
into that.
it's called the Leadership Development Program, and it is a 24 plus month program. We used to be really rigid about the end date. Now it's pretty flexible, but folks join and they come and run our company operated restaurants, and then they help us open our new restaurants. And we have about 250 individuals in the program. Most of them want to become a Chick-fil-A operator.
Yeah,
There's a small percentage of them that want to be on staff at Chick-fil-A. And our job is to really help them grow and develop throughout that period of time through those experiences and other developmental opportunities that we provide for them. And so it's the experience that they have and then the growth over time that's
yeah,
really important to us. And so finding talent to join the program, you can either come with Chick-fil-A experience or without. So we have a group, 15 to 20% of that population comes without any Chick-fil-A experience. And we teach them everything they need to know about the
yeah,
business. And so there's two paths in, and it's in that process. So really responsible for selecting them all the way through exiting the program. But on the selection end, I'm super passionate about that, having come from operator selection and just
yeah.
thinking about what's the right type of talent to be looking for, and then how are we making sure that they are successful while they're with us, and then ultimately once they leave.
It's interesting as well because there's that famous sort of like it's 30 times easier to get into Harvard than it is to get selected for like Chick-fil-A. So you're like, yes. And it's like, I guess you have such a volume of potential people that could probably get into this program. Like you have to sift through like interview a lot of people to kind of get into this 250 number that you just mentioned. I guess the qualifying criteria for that, the bar, it must be so high. So like, and I mean the quality of obviously the Chick-fil-A stores is the highest in the country. Like it, as a foreign man in America, let me tell you, it is by far and
Well,
away.
we love to hear that.
Yeah.
We love to hear
So
that.
there's obviously, I was there on Saturday in Virginia.
Amazing. Thank you.
Fredericksburg. Shout out Fredericksburg.
Yes. Way to go, operator and team.
I mean, they were lovely. But my question is like, because the criteria is so, I mean, the qualifying criteria to even get into this 250, presumably you have an enormous amount of people that are trying to get into it. So there must be certain things that you're looking for from people. And I mean, I don't mean like, have they got money to put down, I mean, today or to like run a store or whichever, but like there are obviously sort of intangible and tangible things that you look for from people. And I guess from a leadership perspective, because leadership is very hard to describe, but when you see it, I guess, are there certain intangibles that, when you see it and are relatively easy to describe? Like, are the things you see that you go, that's a person?
Yeah, so I'm just going to briefly touch on, so operator selection is the world that I started in, and
Yeah.
now being with LDP, I'm in the, at this point in where I'm working with LDP, it's developing and building the talent pool that's going to be part of that operator selection pool. When you talk about how competitive it is really competitive. I think we do still have markets where we're growing, where we're always looking for really strong talent as an operator selection group. So I think that is important to point out, that it depends too on how saturated an area it is and what is the brand awareness in that area in terms of demand and interest. But as you think about candidates and what stands out, if you look at someone there's competencies that we look for, and if they've got all the competency in the world, leadership, to your point, is really important. And then it goes back to, I think, this idea of humility and desire to serve. And something that I'm always looking for when I'm thinking about someone coming into LDP, which would then be eventually part of that operator candidate pool, is what is their motivation, and are they about others or are they about themselves? And if someone is focused on growing, improving, developing those around them, being their team, that's going to impact the customer in a really incredible way. And it's going to create a great culture in the restaurant, and ultimately a team that people want to be a part of. And so it's so much more than I know how to do something. It's really about, there's the what and the how, which we talk about a lot at Chick-fil-A. And
Yeah.
so it's not just the what, it is how do you do it each and every day. And that goes back to, are you a servant leader who is pouring into others and putting them above yourself and thinking about their unique strengths and opportunities, having conversations with them regularly to help them grow and make them better, and you investing in them, which is really what I think separates Chick-fil-A
Yeah.
from other organizations, because of one, the operator model, the operator doing that so intentionally with their team,
Yeah.
and then the team then pouring into the guest and the customer in a way that hopefully feels different for someone who walks in and experiences the restaurant.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the phrase for others. Like thinking of like the other being like, how do you deal with like other people? And it's interesting because I mean, I went to like a Jesuit high school, for example, and
Mhm.
the big phrase that I feel like I've carried throughout my whole life, as religious as I am, but is like we had this phrase like, so we had to be a man for others. It was all boys,
Uh-huh.
the man for others, and they kind of, I suppose, the meaning behind it is like it's not necessarily like about you, like you
Yeah.
like serve other people, and what are the small kind of things that mean that a man for others is not somebody who like leaves their plate behind in the cafeteria, for example, like you bring it up, like you clean it for yourself, like you're not expecting somebody to clean after you, you
Right.
know and it's like, I guess that's an example as opposed to like the actual meaning, but if you know what I mean, in the sense that like it's like a higher meaning of like to be that kind of that humility that you'd mentioned so much earlier, and the
Hmm.
episode kind of like flows right through it. And it's interesting because I think about that a lot, in the sense that like I talk to a lot of leaders like yourself who like talk about culture and impact and organizational intelligence, and like even in my own previous job I worked in consulting and design consulting, which was really just organization consulting. And we used to have a phrase that like culture eats process for breakfast,
Hmm.
and you hear people talk a lot
True.
about it. And I guess like and something to be very proud of is that like you see it in Chick-fil-A's. I mean, not to use the same anecdote from Fredericksburg, but I was like, I made my order and I was standing next to the pick over the DoorDash people come in. And this lady came over to me and she was like, like, are you waiting or is everything okay? And I was like, no, I'm just waiting. It's fine. Just made my order. She's like, oh, well, like, and she saw that my straw didn't go through and it kind of popped up a bit of soda. She's like, let me wipe off that top of soda for you. And I was like, this is it. Like, this is why, and
She,
it's like
I don't
those
know who
things.
she was, but way to go. That's amazing.
Yeah, it was Chick-fil-A Fredericksburg. I mean, there's probably loads of Fredericksburg, but like what I will say is like that kind of small, like those small details are what make sort of that kind of culture. You know what I mean? Like,
And you
and
can't, Alex, you can't teach someone
yeah,
that exam. You can't walk someone through a checklist and say, if you see a guest who has some thing spill out of their cup, or there's an extra bit of, I mean, you just cannot, you can't create every scenario
yeah,
that could possibly happen. And that's just one small example. So you have to look for people who naturally are focused on others. If she hadn't
yeah,
been focused on you, she would never have seen that, noticed it, thought about it, or even thought to say, let me help. How can I
yeah,
make this better for him? And so there, yeah, it is finding the people who are going to do those things. And then it's the job as a leader to encourage that behavior and then reinforce that. So whoever the operator is clearly doing an incredible
yeah,
job saying to their team, this matters to me and should matter to us, that we are paying this special attention to guests and
yeah.
anticipating their needs in that way.
And she didn't know I was going to be interviewing you this
And
week.
she had no idea.
What I will say, it's interesting, and I'm curious as well because you guys are growing like crazy, and with that comes a pressure on culture, because how do you maintain the culture at such an enormous scale? Because I had somebody on the podcast recently, and she was saying that like, she's a restaurant operator, and her name was from Craveworthy Brands. It was Kim DeCarlos. She's one of the previous episodes, and she'd mentioned that like, you go to a restaurant, you go to like any sort of chain restaurant or a franchise restaurant, and you go in and you have a good experience, and you kind of, whether you remember that good experience or not, like it's kind of not like surprised, but you have that sort of one bad experience, and you remember that across that brand, and there could be a
For
thousand of them
sure.
across the country. And so I'm curious how you think about like the culture and leadership aspect when you have like a brand perception and a guest experience that needs to be so consistent across the board because your standards are so high.
It is hard for sure. And as the business grows and gets more complex, I think it's the growth and the complexity that
Yeah.
makes that challenging to make sure that it is a consistent experience each and every time a guest walks in the door. And we certainly have things that we look at and that operators can see to determine how they're doing in those areas outside of just their own experience, but reports and data that helps them with that. I really think, and I mean, I cannot say it enough, but the idea of an operator being involved and invested in their team is the power of the culture that we have at Chick-fil-A, because it is not, there's someone that's a high level leader who is totally bought in to that team and that community in a way that you cannot replicate that with someone that you say, hey, you're gonna lead 10 restaurants and maybe you see that team once every 2 to 3 weeks.
Yeah.
It's just really hard in that scenario, and maybe it can be done. I don't know. I think the what makes Chick-fil-A so special is the operator being so
Yeah.
invested day to day with those individuals and really pouring into them and caring about them, and again putting that team before themselves, which they then see and want to replicate.
It's interesting as well because you alluded to the operator model before. Like,
Mhm.
what do you think kind of gives it that sort of secret sauce? Is it because the owner operator is serving that one facility and can only serve that one facility, or like what do you think kind of gives it a kind of that kind of differentiates you from other sort of restaurant franchise groups?
So when Truett started, it was one restaurant
Yeah,
to one operator, and we've changed that over time, but still very much focused on it not being a large model like you see
yeah,
with many other franchises. And so I think trying to balance the idea of those individuals are really driven and want to grow and continue to have opportunities. And so how do you make sure it stays attractive for them and is great for the business and the customer all at the same time? And working through all of those dynamics is really tricky. But I think it's the operator model and the leader, that being
yeah,
the individual, that person, and then the fact that I think that the split to Chick-fil-A is 50-50 at the end. There's a 15% fee at the top that comes to Chick-fil-A as you think about the financial model behind
yeah.
it, and it's a 50-50 split. And so the idea that Chick-fil-A is a part of everything in the business, not just the top line, I think changes the way that the business is run too, and the perspective for the individual who's in that seat. And so I
Yeah.
think that's part of it too. But I really think it's about the leader and their investment in the team and the community.
Well, I think, as probably the best way to even possibly finish the interview is that, like on that sort of note, I think like, taking away from the fact that like good leaders beget good employees and good people to work for them and encourages them and motivates them. I suppose the last question I have for you on that exact topic is, somebody who lifers themselves to Chick-fil-A. They come in as a teenager because you guys get a lot of those, which is amazing, and they kind of want to stay. How do you think about encouraging them into sort of leadership development programs, and like how do you
Mhm.
scout those sort of like really hardworking teenagers that like that person actually could be amazing for us? Like how do you think about their sort of progression and promotional opportunities?
It's so funny that you say Chick-fil-A lifer, and I don't know that you were putting me in that category, but maybe. But I never thought of
No.
myself as staying at Chick-fil-A for an entire career. When I started, I thought, oh, maybe I'll be here a couple years, and here we are 11 years later, which is wild. But I
Yeah.
think of the folks that you are talking about specifically, which are the team members who
Yep.
start, and most of them start and never see themselves working at Chick-fil-A long term. If you ask almost everyone, they say, I came here because I needed money for gas, I'm providing for my family, or I just needed some extra cash to do things I enjoy. And this was going to be very short term for me.
Yeah.
And what they do is they come, they find a culture that supports them, encourages them, and helps them grow. And they want to be a part of that. And I think how you keep them is you continue to provide opportunities for them to grow and develop within that system. So that starts at the restaurant level where operators have varying levels of leadership that someone can move through and
Yeah.
grow, and that feels great. That's what it's, you're driven, you see that you can do something, you gain confidence from that, and then that propels you to the next thing. And so that happens at the restaurant level. And then what I think is so important for us at the corporate level is even things like the leadership development program that then provide the next opportunity for someone in that situation who wants to continue their career with Chick-fil-A.
Yeah.
And without the leadership development program, it's hard to have that entry point into
Yeah.
the organization. And the talent development program, TDP, which I mentioned earlier, is another way to do that. But for us, those two programs are a way for those individuals who grew up in the restaurant, have shown incredible results in potential, and they can then continue. And it gives operators a really strong marketing tool to say, hey, this can be a career for you long
Yeah.
term. And there's so many opportunities that you can move into. And there's so many success stories through that.
That's awesome. And I mean, there are. I mean, I feel like if you just, every time I go
It's what
online,
makes me love what I do. It's the
yeah,
most incredible thing, Alex, to see someone's dream come true and their life change through
totally. It's
Chick-fil-A.
amazing. It's amazing. And you had that ad campaign probably about 2 years ago. Was it the one where people were sitting on the couches and it was like the
The
staff
little
members, the team
things.
members? Was that what the campaign
It's
was
the little
called?
things
I,
campaign.
I love that
And
because it
they
was
tell
like,
their story about
tell
a
the story.
moment in the restaurant. Yes.
Yeah, I think that was whoever the agency was. I think they cracked it there. I loved it. Well, on that note, Mandy, thank you so much. This is amazing.
Thank you,
I
Alex.
highlighted this part, but thank you so much. And, hope everybody enjoyed listening.
Thank you. It was great.